My aunt went missing almost over 2 years ago under very suspicious circumstances in Prairie Village, Kansas. The last time my aunt was seen in person by her daughter, Elle Green, was at their home on June 20th, 2019 in Prairie Village, Kansas. On February 13th of 2020, my mom got a call from Elle saying that her mom had died. So my mom's younger sister had died. And my mom said at first her mind started racing about like funeral arrangements and like, oh my God, we all have to fly to Kansas now. Like, let's like book this as soon as possible. But then Elle stopped her and she was like, no, she died on the 16th. And then my mom walked over to the calendar and she was like, it's only February 13th. How could your mom have died on the 16th? And then Elle said, no, July 16th, like of 2019, like 7 months ago. So after this, my mom was in complete shock, didn't know what to do. And she asked me if I could speak with Elle. So I called Elle and we basically just went back from the very beginning. And Elle was like, the last time I saw my mom in person at their house was either June 19th or June 20th of 2019. She and her mom had gotten to a little argument like mothers and daughters do, and her mom thought that she was like spending too much time with her friends and her new boyfriend and wanted Elle to be spending more time on summer classes. So her mom grabbed some of her things and then put them by the door and was like, if you don't want to be at home, you can leave. So then Elle grabbed her things and she was crying and she drove to a nearby park, and she honestly thought the whole thing was gonna blow over in like a couple of hours, and she thought that her mom was gonna like call her and say sorry, like come back home. So Elle was like, whatever, we got into a mother-daughter fight, like she's gonna apologize. And then her boyfriend at the time picked her up. His family was so sweet, and then they let her stay with them for a couple of days. But then just a couple days after that, Elle got a text from her dad. So her dad, Jeff Green, claims that he, along with medical aides and some sort of law enforcement, ambushed Angela into a car in the parking lot of a grocery store and then forcibly took her away to a mental institution against her will. And then, by the way, he's like, don't let anyone know about mom, including the Groves, which is my family. So obviously this raises so many red flags. Like, one, you wouldn't be able to do this without any sort of like judge or court approval. And then two, like if they really thought that she was so dangerous that they needed to ambush her somewhere, the last places they would do that is in a public. So I was just asking Elle so many questions. I was like, where's your mom? And she was like, I don't know, my dad won't tell me. He just said that she was somewhere down south. And then I was like, okay, well, what was she admitted for? She said, I don't know, my dad won't tell me. But then finally, she told me that on July 16th, 2019, her dad drove up to her boyfriend's house and he walked over to her and told her, your mom has died of a stroke. And then he just got back in his car and left. And also, just as a side note, like my family does not have a history of strokes. I know that like there's like a huge genetic component to it, but so that was odd. But then I asked Elle, like, was there a funeral or memorial for Angela? And Elle said there wasn't. Her dad didn't want to have one. I asked her which hospital Angela died at. Elle said she didn't know because her dad wouldn't tell her. So that's what happened. We just went back and forth, and then finally I was like, maybe it's most helpful if you just show us her death certificate. And then Elle was like, what's a death certificate? And I think that's a completely fair question for a 19-year-old girl to ask. And so I explained to her what a death certificate was, how it can like explain possibly the cause of death, the time of death, who signed off on the death, so that we could get more answers. And so the very next day, Elle drove to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment to go get a death certificate from her mom, and they did a very thorough search and they couldn't find any record of my aunt's death. And this is when my family knew that something was very wrong. So the next day, my mom, this was February 15th of 2020, my mom gave her sister's number a call and no one picked up. Now we learn that after Angela had disappeared, Jeff took Angela's number as his own. So my mom thought that she was calling her sister, but she was actually calling Jeff. But she just left like a very open-ended voicemail saying like, Angela, Jeff, please give me a call back. We have something very important to discuss. We never got a call or text back. And then Elle told us later that day that she had met up with her dad, Jeff, and he admitted that he ignored the call and had no intention of giving my mom a call back or speaking to us. So at this point, my family was super confused. We were like in shock. We had no answers to any of our questions. We just learned that Jeff had no intention of getting back to us. We didn't have any proof of Angela's death. And then, so I just decided to call the police, and I requested a health and welfare check in their village police department. And when the first set of police officers arrived at the Greens home, no one was there. So they started speaking with the neighbors. And the neighbors mentioned that they hadn't seen Angela in like a while, in a couple months. And they were kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird because normally she's out gardening. But then they never thought to call the police because one neighbor said it was because they figured that Angela had just gone back to China. I think it's important to note that Angela came to the U.S. around 1998, and she had never once gone back to China. So while the police were interviewing the neighbors, Jeff pulled up into his driveway, and the police approached him and they asked him where Angela was. And Jeff told the police that Angela was out with friends, would be back after the 3-day weekend because that Monday was President's Day. And honestly, anyone who knows Angela knows that this is ridiculous. Like, Angela was a massive homebody. She did not have a close friend circle. I mean, my cousin Elle was telling me that Angela wouldn't even go to the grocery store without either her or Jeff with her. Like, it's just, there's no way she would have like some sort of girls' weekend. And then after this, the police told me there was nothing they could do, and they just had to wait to see if Angela would come back after the weekend. So after this, the police told me that there was nothing they could do. They just had to wait until like that Monday when President's Day weekend was over and see if Angela had come back. And surprised, they went back and she wasn't back. And then when they tried to knock on the door again, Jeff Green slash like Ellie's dad slash Angela's husband handed them the business card of a criminal defense attorney that he had recently hired named Paul Cram, and then he said he would no longer speak to the police, and then he shut the door on them. After all this happened, Elle went to the police station and then reported her mom is missing, and then the police opened up a missing person investigation. We knew that Jeff wouldn't speak to us or the police, but he was still talking to Elle, so we asked her dad to ask her some questions to record all their interactions. Kansas and Missouri are one consent states. I made sure to look that up. We learned that, according to Jeff had gotten a call while he was at work from the hospital where my aunt allegedly was being held, saying that Angela had died and that after learning about his wife's death, Jeff had her cremated. So once we heard this, we were like, okay, well, which hospital? Because usually hospitals call, they'll announce like, hi, this is so-and-so calling from so-and-so hospital. And then Elle was like, he won't tell me which hospital. So we were also thinking, well, wouldn't he want to see her body? Like, just to even like confirm her death or like pay his respects. And Jeff's response was like, it was a crazy busy day at work and I couldn't leave, which is a ridiculous thing to say because he works in IT at a courthouse. Like, of course he could have left.
Hi, I realize that I've been talking very slowly, so I'm going to try to talk a little bit faster now. And here's another picture of Angela when she was younger, and then that's her holding Elle as a baby. So we asked Elle to ask her dad where the death certificate and where the ashes were, and then Jeff told her that both were at home. Jeff also said that one day a complete stranger, whom he described as a Caucasian man with dark hair in his mid-40s, dropped off an urn at the house and made Jeff pay $1,500 for it. And Elle was like, wow, $1,500 is a lot of money. And she knew that her dad never had that much cash on hand. So when she asked him about this, Jeff was like, oh, well, like $1,500 is about right for a cremation. And my family thought this was a weird statement to make. But then we also thought, okay, well, where can we find this mysterious man who dropped off the urn, who dropped off the ashes? Like, where did he come from? Where did he work? We just had no answers to anything. So then we were like, Elle, asked him to send a picture of the death certificate and also the urn where her ashes were. And Jeff did not send a picture of the death certificate. He said he couldn't find it, but he did send a picture of a bright red urn. And just jumping forward, the police later found during a search of the house that there was no death certificate, not only in the house, but that there was absolutely no record of Angela's death in the entire country. The police also discovered during the search of the house that the urn was empty. There were no ashes in it. And then I was also told that the police learned during a search of Jeff's bank records that he had purchased the urn himself online. There were 2 search warrants that were initially issued. There was one for the house and then another for a property where Jeff kept his cars. There is apparently a huge pond by that property where Jeff keeps his cars, so the police had around 60 divers looking for a body, but Angela's body was not found. And then during the search of the house, the police found out that Angela's purse, car keys, driver's license, passport, wallet, and phone were all still at the home. The police also found a life insurance document dated and signed after Angela's disappearance. And when the police questioned Elle about this document, Elle said that her dad told her to sign the document as her mom. She didn't know what she was signing, but he placed it in front of her and he was like, you need to sign this and pretend to be your mom. So she just listened to her dad and signed it. So Elle continued to have phone conversations with her dad and record them for us. Jeff kept changing his story, and then he finally admitted that he lied about Angela being taken away to a mental institution and said that she was actually still alive now and that she ran away with a friend. And Elle was like, what friend? Angela did not have any friends. And then Jeff just gave a very non-answer saying like, oh, who knows what friend? All I know is that she's gone. And then Elle was like, why did you tell me that my mom was dead then? And then Jeff was like, I didn't want you to think that she left us, but the truth is that she just didn't want anything to do with us anymore. And this was such a dumb story because although Angela didn't have any friends, she poured her entire life and soul into Elle, and they were super close. There's no way that she would just leave without Elle. Angela also wouldn't have anyone to run away with. She didn't socialize, she wasn't a part of any community activities, she didn't go to church, she didn't use the computer, and she very rarely used her phone. The Department of Homeland Security also told us that they couldn't find any record of Angela traveling, whether it be by plane, train, or bus. So at this point, we didn't know what to do. Elle did a great job with providing the police with as much information as she could and told them everything she knew, but eventually we were told in July 2020 that the case had gone cold. And then in November 2020, producers from the Dr. Phil show reached out to us and they said that they were interested in covering our story on the show, and they offered to hire 2 private investigators for us, which we agreed to. And the 2 private investigators instructed Elle to go collect dirt samples from a 3rd property where Jeff had bought a house. And in particular, there's an area where Jeff took hostas that Angela had planted from their house, and he replanted them on this new property, which Elle thought was strange. So the private investigators then took the dirt samples that Elle gave them and they spread the samples out in 3 different areas, and they said that 2 cadaver dogs each independently marked all 3 spots as positive for human remains. The private investigators gave this evidence to the police department, and then the police department presented it to the judge, and the judge signed off on a 3rd warrant for the Lawrence house in December, and police said that they couldn't find anything useful from that search either. A Taiwanese Australian journalist asked the Prairie Village Police Department if cadaver dogs were brought to the property to assist with the search, and they said they did not bring cadaver dogs, and they also said that they dug around that area by hand. To this day, we haven't gotten any answers. We don't know if Angela is dead or alive. We have no idea what happened. We don't know where she is. We believe there's a very slim chance that she is still alive, though. Please help spread my family's story so that we can figure out what happened to Angela and get justice for her.